Now, Moscow and the US have confirmed Ukraine's use of US long-range missiles within Russia. The Kremlin warned earlier that Ukraine's use of Western-supplied missiles could trigger a nuclear response under a new doctrine approved by Vladimir Putin. This afternoon, Keir Starmer has been speaking at the G20 summit in Brazil, but evaded questions about Ukraine using long-range missiles.
I'm not going to comment on operational details. The reason that I'm not going to comment is, I think, well understood, which is Putin is the winner if we do so, and it will undermine Ukraine, and I'm not prepared to do that.
That was Keir Starmer there. Michael Evans is across this for The Times, ex-Pentagon correspondent for The Times in DC, author of First with the News. Michael, thanks so much for being with us. Can you describe exactly what's been used and what targets have been hit?
So what they've used is this, it's called ATACMS, which is an army tactical system, which the Americans have supplied to Ukraine. Ukraine's been wanting this for months and months and months. It has a range of 190 miles, which means that if they fire it with its full range, it could effectively make vulnerable hundreds of Russian military targets inside Russia. So what they've done today, or overnight, is they have launched apparently 6 of these missiles. They've aimed them at an ammunition depot in a region about 70 miles beyond the Ukrainian border into Russia, and have caused some damage, although we haven't actually managed to get a full assessment of that. The Russians are claiming that they shot down 5 of them and one of them was damaged, but this sort of debris caused some damage to a building. One should perhaps treat that with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because we don't know yet how much damage was caused. These are highly effective, highly accurate, and extremely fast missiles, which are difficult both to detect and to bring down.
Today also marks 100 days of war between Russia and Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has lowered the threshold for a nuclear response by Russia.
1,000 days, actually.
Sorry, 1,000 days. Forgive me. I meant to say 1,000. I said 100, did I? Apologies. Look, marking that significant number of days, and also reflecting on the fact that Vladimir Putin has changed Russia's nuclear doctrine. What does this mean? Does it mean that the West, that Ukraine is now more vulnerable to a nuclear attack from Russia? Just spell this out clearly for us, because you have to sort of dig into the usual Russian posturing, I suppose, don't you?
I mean, potentially, if you look at the words that Putin has used, potentially, it could mean that he has lowered the threshold in order to go ahead and launch tactical nuclear missiles against Ukraine. But if you look at it more carefully and more sensibly and more intelligently, I think it's highly unlikely that Putin would go down that route for a number of reasons. First of all, the new doctrine that he has outlined, which incidentally first came into the public arena in September, so he's actually just sort of confirming what was said before. What it says is that if Russia is attacked by another country with a conventional weapon supplied by a nuclear power, i.e. America or Britain or France, then that will be, and if it is believed to be a critical, it has a critical damage in Russia, then he would reserve the right to respond with tactical nuclear weapons. Well, first of all, if you go for what happened today, with 6 missiles launched, 5 of them allegedly shot down, 1 of them causing minor damage, it's hardly can be considered of critical risk to Russian sovereignty. But put that to one side. What he's done, the Russian leader, is to lower the threshold by saying that instead of any attack that would literally lead to the existential threat, in other words, the very existence of Russia, then he would respond with nuclear weapons. Now he's saying if it's a critical attack, and that, of course, is a word that can be, have many, many definitions and explanations. And I don't think the current situation gives rise to that. And I think Putin knows that. But of course, the rhetoric, the nuclear rhetoric, is both alarming because obviously people think that he might do it, and it's also intended as pressure on America and on Ukraine, but particularly on America, not to provide any more of these missiles or anything else that you think might directly affect Russia itself.
Will that deter Britain at all? Do you expect the UK to authorise use of their Storm Shadow missiles inside Russia by Ukraine?
I mean, I would be surprised if they didn't, because I think the argument all along, led by Joe Biden, has been we don't want to supply or allow long-range weapons to be used against targets in Russia itself, and for lots of reasons. The main one being he didn't want to escalate the war and to force Putin to retaliate in a way that would be leads to something much more dangerous and much more escalatory. In other words, a war with NATO. So he held back from that. Now that Biden's actually given permission for these weapons to be used, it seems it would be rather odd if one of America's closest allies, and I'm talking about Britain and France, who have this system, Storm Shadow, which was developed by both countries, for them not to use this missile as well would be strange. But it's up to the Labour government, and it's up to the Labour government with American approval as well. And I don't know whether that's going to happen, but it would be surprising if it didn't. But I think what Keir Starmer has effectively said, probably quite sensibly, is that if we do it, we're not going to let you know, and it'll just happen if it happens. Whereas Washington tends to do these things differently, and they make a big announcement, and then everyone knows about it.
Michael, an interesting note on the different approaches by each government. Really good to speak to you. There's extensive reporting by the Times team, including Michael, which really breaks down what has happened, what this means in terms of, first of all, the use of ATACMS, but also the wider threat of nuclear action by Russia. It's all beautifully explained. It's up on the times.com right now. Michael Evans, ex-Pentagon correspondent for the Times in DC, thank you very much for being with us.
Now, welcome to the programme Hannah Hopko, who's a former Ukrainian MP, former head of the Committee on Foreign Affairs at the Ukrainian Parliament. She's on the line from Washington, DC. Evening to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Thank you for joining us. So Russia, it seems, it is said, has been hit by 6 American missiles. It struck at a Russian arsenal. What do you make of that news? And will it make very much difference to the course of the war?
So, of course, we Ukrainians welcome the long overdue permission by President Biden to use ATACMS missiles for strikes in Russia, even if it's in limited capacity. So actually, we also ask, and I'm here in Washington, D.C., that Washington must lift all its restrictions on the use of Western-made weapon against Russia by other partners like the UK, France, which is crucially important because Russia, together with North Korea, Iran, China behind Russian military with the supply of ballistic missiles, North Korean troops. Russia has this weapon resource superiority, also more manpower. And this is actually how you could expect that Ukraine, with one hand tied behind, could win this war and defeat not just Russia, but the whole axis of tyrannies. So finally, Biden, before he leaves office, he made this decision, even if it's not full decision. Yeah. And regarding the Kursk operation, so this was important for Ukraine when we knew back in May this year from the intelligence sources that Russia want to attack us from Kursk region and create problems for Ukraine as a buffer zone in Sumy region. So this was a preventive step. And actually, the delay of weapon supply from our key strategic partners who guaranteed our security when Ukraine gave up the third largest nuclear arsenal after Soviet Union collapsed. So it's really important that credibility of the US as a leader of free world is not just about as long as it takes it's about real guarantees, which we could see by when the US deliver what we were promised.
Right. And now the British Prime Minister, Hannah, has been saying he supports the idea, and Britain supports the idea of giving Ukraine all the support it needs to double down on that support for Ukraine in this war. Is it important, is it necessary for Britain to have Storm Shadow British missiles used in the same way that American missiles are now being used to fulfill that promise?
Of course, because it's about your credibility. And actually, now Ukraine defend the NATO eastern flank countries, but we cannot be shielded forever. And it's also important that Ukraine has recorded an episodic cases of the usage of dangerous chemical weapons by Russian forces. So Russia violates many international conventions, including chemical weapon convention. So how Ukraine can win with against Russia, which is committing genocide against us? Today we mark 1,000 days of genocidal wars, but let me remind, the war started back in February 2014 from the seizure of Crimea, Ukrainian territory. So actually it's already 10 years of ongoing Russian aggression, which turned into the genocide. And I'm kindly asking to provide more Storm Shadow, Scalps, and ATACMS, and actually to help Ukraine to go through winter, because I just came yesterday from Kiev to DC. Daily, we are being terrorized by Russian massive missile attacks, both cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, kamikaze drones. They are killing innocent civilians daily. This terror, this genocide, ecocide is happening in Europe in 21st century. So I think morality doesn't end at the NATO borders.
Right.
Humanity also doesn't end at the NATO borders. So this is why I think for UK, it's crucially important to be with us, because it's about European security. And Russia and China, they also have plans for Nordic area. They want to have this access to critical strategic raw minerals. Yeah. And the only Russian defeat will be seriously considered as a signal from Western nations that they should stop this practice of genocidal war, this attack on sovereign nations.
Okay, Hannah Hopko, thank you. That is your clear message to the allies of Ukraine, including the leadership of the United Kingdom. Thank you for joining us.